History is not merely a collection of verified facts. It is a narrative shaped by those who hold the power to write it. When the modern world looks at Argentina, it perceives a European mirror reflecting the architecture of Paris and the cultural lineages of Italy and Spain. This contemporary image is an intentional construct, a carefully engineered national identity designed to overshadow a foundational truth. The truth is that Argentina was not built by European hands alone. Beneath the cobblestones of modern Buenos Aires lies a history painted in entirely different colors. To uncover the true genesis of this nation, we must travel back to the colonial era of the 16th and 17th centuries. When the Spanish crown established its foothold in the southern cone of the continent, it faced a massive labor deficit. The colonial machine required an immense, continuous workforce to extract wealth, cultivate land, and erect cities. The solution was found across the Atlantic Ocean, embedded in the brutal mechanics of the transatlantic slave trade. From its very inception, the economic lifeblood of Argentina was fueled by the sweat, blood, and resilience of African people. The port of Buenos Aires was not simply a gateway for the legal and illegal trade of silver, leather, and agricultural goods. It was a primary, highly lucrative artery for human trafficking in South America. While mainstream history heavily emphasizes the massive plantation systems of Brazil and the Caribbean, the Southern Cone was equally dependent on forced labor. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children were violently torn from their ancestral homelands in Angola, the Congo, and Mozambique. After surviving the unimaginable horrors of the Middle Passage, these individuals stepped onto the muddy shores of the Rio de la Plata. The affluent neighborhood known today as Retiro, a place of luxury hotels and manicured parks, was once the site of the city's primary slave market. By the late 18th century, the demographics of the territory revealed a reality that modern textbooks have attempted to minimize. Nearly one-third of the population of Buenos Aires was black. In the interior provinces, such as Santiago del Estero, Tucumán, and Salta, people of African descent comprised up to 70% of the total population. They were the artisans, the builders, the domestic workers, and the driving force of the colonial economy. As the 19th century dawned, the global geopolitical landscape fractured. The Spanish Empire was weakening, and the elites of Buenos Aires seized the opportunity to declare independence. However, an ideal cannot fight a war. A revolution requires bodies willing to face the firing squad. To swell the ranks of the revolutionary forces, the provisional governments turned their gaze toward the enslaved population, offering a high-stakes, desperate bargain. They promised legal emancipation to any enslaved man who joined the military. This policy led to the formation of the legendary African battalions, which became the frontline vanguard of the Argentine Wars of Independence. Enslaved men were organized into segregated infantry regiments and deliberately positioned at the absolute front of the most perilous military engagements. They formed the backbone of General José de San Martin's historic Army of the Andes, scaling the frozen, lethal peaks of the mountains to liberate Chile and Peru. These soldiers paid for Argentina's sovereignty with their lives. Yet when independence was achieved, the institutional promises of total equality and freedom quickly evaporated into the wind. Among the thousands of Afro-Argentine historical figures whose legacies were systematically removed from national memory, one woman stands as an undeniable pillar of bravery: María Remedios del Valle. Born in Buenos Aires, this Afro-Argentine woman did not remain a bystander while the war for independence determined the fate of her homeland. She marched directly alongside the Army of the North, serving not only as a nurse tending to the catastrophic wounds of the soldiers, but as a fierce, active combatant on the battlefield. Her courage was so immense that General Manuel Belgrano officially appointed her as a captain of his army, an extraordinary, unprecedented honor for a black woman in a deeply patriarchal colonial society. She survived multiple bullet wounds, enemy captures, and public floggings by royalist forces, earning the revered title of La Madre de la Patria, the Mother of the Homeland. Tragically, following the war, this national icon was reduced to extreme poverty, forced to beg for bread on the steps of the very government buildings she bled to establish. Her life embodies both the peak of Afro-Argentine patriotism and the depth of early historical erasure. The mid-19th century introduced a complex, highly politicized chapter for the Afro-Argentine community during the regime of the governor Juan Manuel de Rosas. Rosas, a polarizing populist leader, recognized the immense political and military leverage held by the large black population of Buenos Aires. Unlike the elite Unitarian opposition who viewed the Afro-descendant population with social disdain, Rosas actively courted them, attending their communal African nation councils known as Sociedades de Negros. Under his governance, Afro-Argentines secured a level of cultural protection and public visibility they had never previously experienced. They were permitted to openly practice their traditional ceremonies, play their drums, and organize mutual aid societies that protected their vulnerable sick and elderly. In return, the black community became a fiercely loyal political base, filling the ranks of his military units and personal guards. However, this alliance carried severe consequences. By aligning their survival so closely with a controversial dictator, the Afro-Argentine community became a target for the incoming liberal elites, who sought retribution after Rosas fell from power in 1852. The physical reduction of the Afro-Argentine population was dramatically accelerated by one of the bloodiest geopolitical conflicts in South American history, the War of the Triple Alliance. From 1864 to 1870, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay allied to wage a total, devastating war against Paraguay. The conflict demanded an unprecedented mobilization of human lives, and the elite government of Buenos Aires utilized this mobilization to alter internal demographics. Military conscription targeted the Afro-Argentine community with disproportionate severity. While affluent, European-descended citizens routinely paid financial fees to exempt themselves or their sons from service, impoverished black men possessed no such recourse. Entire generations of Afro-Argentine fathers, brothers, and sons were sent directly to the front lines, acting as the vanguard in brutal trench warfare. The casualty rates were catastrophic. The war decimated the male demographic of the Afro-Argentine population, fundamentally crippling the community's capacity to naturally sustain its numbers across generations. While war depleted the Afro-Argentine population on distant battlefields, an invisible killer struck them at home. In 1871, a catastrophic yellow fever epidemic hit Buenos Aires. The outbreak quickly threw the city into a state of panic, but the devastation was starkly divided along racial and socioeconomic lines. The wealthy, European-descended ruling class immediately evacuated their grand estates in the southern districts of San Telmo and Montserrat, fleeing to the northern suburbs of Recoleta and Palermo. Left behind in the low-lying, damp southern sectors were the impoverished, newly arriving European immigrants, and the vast majority of the Afro-Argentine population. They were crowded into conventillos, densely packed tenement houses characterized by poor sanitation and an absolute lack of clean water or medical access. The yellow fever virus spread through these close quarters like wildfire. Deprived of resources or the financial means to escape, Afro-Argentines died by the thousands. The epidemic structurally dismantled the historical black neighborhoods of the city, permanently displacing the survivors. To the global community, tango is the definitive symbol of Argentine cultural identity, an art form associated with European romance, nostalgia, and elegance. However, behind this global image lies a profound history of cultural appropriation and systematic sanitization. The very word tango itself does not originate from Europe. It is of African origin. Historically, the term referred to the physical spaces and communal grounds where enslaved and free African people gathered to dance, drum, and maintain their ancestral heritage. The musical DNA of early tango is directly derived from candombe, an African-Argentine rhythm and dance form. In the late 19th century, the marginalized African population blended their polyrhythmic drumming traditions with the melodies of incoming European immigrants in the slums of Buenos Aires. This cross-cultural collision created the fundamental structures of early tango. As the dance gained popularity and attracted the interest of the upper classes, it was deliberately sanitized. The heavy African syncopation was ironed out, the explicit black history was suppressed, and tango was exported to the world as a purely white creation. The physical reduction of the Afro-Argentine population through war and disease provided the backdrop for the state to execute its final, ideological goal: the complete erasure of blackness from the national identity. In the late 19th century, a political and intellectual elite known as the Generation of 1880 assumed control of the nation. Led by figures like President Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, this leadership class shared a radical vision to transform Argentina into a white European country. They implemented aggressive state-funded immigration policies that brought millions of European immigrants to Argentine shores, successfully overwhelming the native demographics. Alongside this engineering came an administrative erasure. The national census deliberately stopped tracking citizens by race and African descent, rendering the black population statistically invisible overnight. School curricula were rewritten to teach future generations that the Afro-Argentine population had simply died out due to natural historical forces. The official narrative became absolute. Argentina is a white nation. To be both black and Argentine became an institutional contradiction. For over a century, the myth of the entirely white nation persisted, accepted globally, and internalized domestically. But a community cannot be fully erased by ink and administrative policy alone. The roots of Africa in Argentina were buried deep, hidden beneath the modern avenues of Buenos Aires, waiting for the moment to re-emerge. Today, that moment has arrived. A powerful cultural and political reawakening is sweeping across the nation. A new generation of Afro-Argentines is stepping into the light, proudly declaring a truth that state history tried to suppress for over 150 years. Aquí estamos, we are still here. Through academic research, grassroots activism, and a passionate reclamation of ancestral arts, they are compelling the nation to confront the reality of its own heritage. The state has begun officially recognizing historical figures like María Remedios del Valle, and modern censuses are finally allowing citizens to reclaim their African ancestry. The history of black people in Argentina is not a tragedy of disappearance. It is an epic of resilience, an enduring testament to a people who survived and whose heartbeat continues to define the rhythm of the nation.